Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time I thought I'd go through and show my personal top 10 vintage Star Wars action figures, and I'd be very interested to know what you think of my choices and if there's some that you would have included in your personal top 10. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and let's take a look. Okay, so number one then is Chewbacca. So why Chewie, I hear you cry? Well, this was the first ever figure that I bought. It's simple as that. So he's got a lot of memories, good memories for me. And I remember having Chewie and playing with him. I don't know, was he the only one I bought at the time? I think it was. I think it was literally just Chewbacca, and then possibly my second figure was the original R2-D2. And I've got a really, really nice example of this particular Chewie. And I remember, as a kid, when these came out, it was 1978. I was 8, getting on 9 years old, and I suppose you could say, the perfect age to be enjoying vintage Star Wars figures, or Star Wars figures. They weren't vintage, of course, back then. They were brand new. And I remember sort of thinking, foolishly saying to my friends, oh yeah, he's got these holes on the bottom because he's going to fly in the second film. Like, whew. But no, I think he's not a particularly great sculpt. I think it was perhaps as good as they ever could do, and it's quite telling that they never did another Chewbacca figure, did they? Because the first one was almost, you could say, a bit of a masterpiece. Well, possibly. It just didn't need to be changed, did it? It was as good as it was possibly going to get. And quite an interesting gun as well, wasn't it? His bowcaster. It was unique to the figure. But I think, yeah, I would always include that one in my top 10 because it was the first ever figure that I bought as a kid, or had bought for me, of course, because I seem to remember back then they were maybe £1.99, and the place to buy vintage Star Wars, or I keep calling it vintage, original Star Wars figures, was Debenhams in my hometown. They were the main place, and then a place called Youngsters. Now, also released at the same time, 1978, was this little fella, the Death Squad Commander. Now, I always absolutely loved this one. However, for some reason, when I was a kid, I called him the Death Star Commander, and I don't know why that is. I've actually got a couple of this one. This one's got a slight nick on his hand, but I've got another one in my display case. I love him so much. I've got 2 in actual fact. So I think he got the nickname Old Chrome Head, and I think I've got one which has got like matte boots and gloves, and the other one has got shiny boots and gloves. So whether that's a variation, I don't really know. But what I can tell you is I loved this one, and I always had to as a kid, because that Christmas I had bought for me my birthday is very close to Christmas, so I would often get joint presents. So my parents bought me the Death Star. That was my joint birthday and Christmas present, because it was a huge play set at the time, and I remember having a couple like that and a couple of Stormtroopers as well, and I just have great memories of the Death Squad Commander. It's just fantastic. I've always loved it. To this day, I think it's probably one of my favourite figures. I mean, it's definitely in the top 10. I'd say it's possibly in the top 3 of my greatest ever figures, but I'm just showing these sort of in release date, as I sort of got them when I was young, as the figures were coming out. But those two, they were my 2 favourites from the original Star Wars 12. But then came this one, so that for the 21s, the next, like 21 backs as they're called, it was the next little wave of 8, and that's Hammerhead. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid playing with figures, say you went out on a family trip somewhere, you could always take a figure or 2 with you, and for me, it was always, for some reason, it was always Hammerhead, or maybe Luke in his X-Wing outfit. But Hammerhead was the main one I took, and I honestly can't remember why. So I would have many Hammerhead adventures. He was just such an interesting figure. The feel of it, just the look of it, everything about it screamed Star Wars, didn't it? It was so unusual. And I just loved this figure to death. I really do. And I still love him today. He's a great figure. I know there's people who just collect him as a focus. If indeed it is a him, but he was just great, and I've always had a soft spot for Hammerhead, and still do to this day. He was the one that came with me on many adventures. Now, the first of two droids we're going to show is this fellow, which is R5D4. So this isn't my original one. I replaced that fairly recently. This was one that was graded, and I released him from his plastic coffin, so I had a really nice example of him. But R5D4, for some reason, even though he was a bit of a malfunctioning droid, wasn't he, in that first film, I've always just loved him. And you see, he clicks away there, lovely. And he was just a bit more, I don't know, just something a bit different from R2D2, I suppose. And he was my droid of choice. I did the following year. I had the Palatoy Land of the Jawas playset, and I had the little Palatoy Land Speeder without the opening bonnet. This was the solid bonnet version, and I had the Cantina. They were my original playsets. That's all I had, and I don't really remember getting the Empire ones at all. Not at the time. It was years later before I even got a Millennium Falcon. So mine were very much related to those early days. And R5D4, well, he was a key part of it, and I really, really enjoyed him. A great figure. Until, of course, the very first of the Empire figures, which was Boba Fett. So that's the later Trilogo Boba Fett, and this is the original one. I shall pop over that side there. So Boba Fett, I got mail order, like I got a few, and for that made it even more special, because I'd seen the adverts in things like Star Wars Monthly, end of Star Wars Weekly, went monthly for a little while before Empire got released, and there was adverts from Palatoy in there about ordering Boba Fett mail order. And you had to save a certain, nameplates and what have you, and send them in. And that is how I first got Boba Fett. And I think for a lot of people, he might be the best figure ever released. And for me, I think he probably is. I'm thinking Death Squad Commander is number 2 or 3, but I think Boba Fett is probably my number 1 slot. But I'm showing you my personal top 10 in sort of release order as I bought these figures, and that's the reason why. It was because he was mail order. He was like nothing else in the Star Wars universe. The closest at that time possibly was, say, a Stormtrooper with that sort of armor, and he was just the coolest. And you can see why he's such a cool and collectible figure today. Nothing I think will match the joy of when that one first fell through my letterbox as a kid. I was over the moon with it. It was just the coolest figure you could possibly own. Absolutely fantastic. And then I got a couple more Empire figures. So the next one was Yoda. Now, as a kid, I was never really like a fan of the figures that were small, like the Jawa, for example, because I didn't feel they were really value for money. You know what I mean? You didn't get a lot of figure for your money. Whereas, later on when the Gamorrean Guard was released, that was a lot of plastic for your money, but the price was the same, you see. So I felt cheated when I bought a Jawa for $1.99 when I could have had a full-size figure. It was just the way it was. But that's not to take anything away from Yoda, which I think is a small figure, but it's got a lot going on. So you've got the cape, the cane, the snake, and there was a couple of variations of the brown and the orange snake, plus his little belt there. And from that point of view, because he had so many accessories, I thought, you're actually getting a bit more value for money. And it was a sign about how the figures had progressed from those early days. The technology had got a bit better, and I felt like you got a little bit more for your money. So I think Yoda ranks very highly in the world of vintage figures these days, and he's an iconic character. This is a very collectible figure. There's lots of bits that can go missing, so finding complete ones is obviously going to take you a bit of time. And I think, although he wasn't a figure that I played with, because by then I was getting about 12 or 13, come the time these Empire figures started to get released. By this time I'd moved more from playing with the figures to more like displaying them. So I still had my original Death Star, my other playsets, but I had the figures out, and I was into other stuff as well at the time. I was getting into Doctor Who in a big way, and getting into reading and things like that. And there was other sort of interests. This also coincided with the home computer market coming in, and I was very much getting into my old ZX Spectrum, and I had friends who had other computers as well, and that was a distraction, because you have to remember back then there was such a massive delay from Star Wars to Empire, like 3 years, and then another 2.5, almost 3 years until Jedi came out. In that time, any kid is not going to stay completely loyal to one brand, and there was so much else coming out, so I was just soaking it up as a kid from that era, and that's why I drifted away from Star Wars a little bit. And it wasn't really until Jedi came out that I sort of got really back into it. But yeah, I still love the Yoda figure, and it's still a real classic to this day. Okay, so the last one from Empire Strikes Back is this little fella. It's C-3PO with his removable limbs. And of course he came with this like little netting backpack, which would go on Chewbacca, and Chewbacca could carry all the C-3PO bits. So this one was another innovation for Empire, in that you could take off his arms and legs. And this is a really, really nice example of C-3PO. But there we are. That is, you see his arm just comes out there. So yeah, this particular one was when I had my shop back in the 90s. We actually had a run of C-3PO amongst a few other figures that we had like mint. We had loads of them, like, I don't know, a couple of hundred C-3POs, and they were only cheap. It was a cheapish figure to actually purchase back then. Even mint like that, we used to knock them out for about 4 or 5 quid each, and that's one from that little lot there. And I've always liked C-3PO, and it was a really, for some reason I preferred that one to the original one, just because there was just more to do with it, and it felt like once again you were getting a little bit of value for money. But that was it for Empire. And then we've got another mail order. So Mr. Plain here, Admiral Akbar. Now you may think, well, why is this possibly in your top 10? And I'll tell you why. Because when, as a kid, we started seeing what was going to be happening with Jedi and the film, Return of the Jedi, I got so excited by it. I was buying the comic. I'd already bought the book and read it cover to cover, and I was just over the moon with how amazing Jedi was going to look. It was already being hailed as the most expensive film that had ever been made, and I knew the special effects were going to be just mind-blowing for the time, and they did not disappoint. And it really is great. So, of course, Admiral Akbar once again was offered as a mail order, and that's how I first got him, and I got him twice. I had enough figures built up that I could actually afford to send off for him 2 times, and that's exactly what I did. But there's the only one I've got these days, and he's an absolute mint example. And what a memorable character in the Star Wars universe. And for that reason, for being so excited when Akbar first turned up in his little, looked like a box that looked like a toothpaste box, with my address on, and a little Palatoy leaflet inside. I was like, wow, absolutely brilliant. And I remember taking it to school and showing it around to my mates. And it's those sorts of memories that stick with you all these years, and that's why he's in my top 10. It's as simple as that, because it sparks a lot of memories, and I think he's not a badly designed figure either. It really is quite nice. Now, obviously, Jedi had loads of figures, but that's the only one that really sort of resonated with me until, by this time, it was like 1985, wasn't it? 85, 86. And the last few, what we would call the Tri-Logo figures, the last 17, over in the States, those Power of the Force figures got released. And there was 3 figures in that range that I think are absolute highlights. The first one is the best of the Imperials, which is the Imperial Gunner. Now, this was a figure that always looked absolutely awesome. He was so menacing. He was so much cooler than just the ordinary sort of stormtroopers, and obviously quite a scarce figure to find these days, like a lot of the last 17. But he hit a lot of buttons for me. I thought, this is just the coolest guy out there. And it's a great figure. They really pulled it off. I'm not sure how common it is, but mine's got a slightly uneven sort of ridge along his helmet, like almost like a moulding line. But it was always really cool. And although I was absolutely not playing with the figures back then, I was just displaying them. I remember, I can picture it now, in my bedroom at home, having all the Star Wars figures lined up. This one was a worthy addition to it, and I thought absolutely fantastic. Alongside the next fella, which is R2-D2 with his pop-up lightsaber. So obviously there'd been the original R2, there'd been the one with the sensor scope, which itself was pretty cool, but nothing as cool as this. And having been able to sort of turn his head so the lightsaber would come out was really quite innovative at the time. And well, I certainly loved it. And I remember having well, later on, I had multiples of that one because I found a few remaindered. They were just 29p, and I had 3 or 4 different ones. But this was I think this was my original one from back in the day. It's got a tiny bit of like yellowing or staining, so my suspicion is it was the original one. But I can't really remember, in all honesty. But it's a great one. It's a lovely figure. It's my favourite of all the R2s, I think, and I don't think anyone would dispute that. Out of the 4, I suppose, if you include the droids, there was 4 different versions. That's my favourite one, and I would say, yeah, I think that would be hard to dispute, in all honesty. And alongside, I like all the droids, don't get me wrong, I really do, but those two there, R5 and R2, that particular pairing, I think is pretty classic. Which leads me to my very last one, and I'd say he was certainly, I'd say probably number 4 in my my run of my top 10 figures, and that's Luke Stormtrooper. So I remember seeing this one and really not quite believing my eyes, in all honesty. I thought, how did this come out? When did this get released? Because there was no real definitive sort of list back then, and I remember coming across it thinking, wow, that is really quite something. So I bought it, and I remember even sort of looking for the Han Solo version of it as well, but obviously that never got released. But I think they did a great job of this. I mean, they really did. And having him, be able to put the helmet on was just fantastic. So, yeah, a great figure, and one that I, in the end, really enjoyed having. As I said, I wonder what the reasoning was behind them never doing Han Solo. I guess it was just this was, I suppose, part of the last hurrah for Star Wars. That's the only thing I can sort of think of. But I remember back then, I didn't see all the last 17 figures at the time, but I pretty much saw every single one, including Yak and Han Carbonite, the Gunner, R2's lightsaber, Barad. I remember picking all of those up pretty cheap after the Star Wars wave had come and gone. Because by this time, I remember Star Wars was fighting for shelf space with the Transformers. They were coming in big. And for me, it was almost the end of the era, really. I was 16 by then. And I was, although I was a huge fan, I wasn't really playing with toys. I was completely invested in my computer and girls. So... trying to get a girlfriend, and that was probably the main sort of focus of me, but it never ever took away my love of Star Wars. And obviously I've still absolutely, completely and utterly got it today, and I think these ones here represent perhaps my absolute top 10 of the favourite vintage figures. If I had to choose a few honourable mentions, it probably would be Luke X-Wing. Is a great figure. Luke Farm Boy, lots of good fun having with that one back in the day. Probably Greedo as well was another great figure. But I think those that you see there encapsulate my personal top 10. So I would be very interested to know what your personal top 10 is and which ones you might have included. Luke Bespin, another really great figure. But there we go. Hope you enjoyed that little trip through nostalgia and a bit trip down memory lane there, and certainly brought back a few memories for me. If you have enjoyed this, do please give the video a thumbs up. Do please hit that subscribe button if you've not already for regular vintage Star Wars content, and I'll look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.